You know, shipwrecks are always tragic, right? But what happened after the Dutch ship Batavia went down in 1629? Well, that's on a whole other level. It's not just a tragedy. It's one of the most chilling, real-life horror stories you'll ever hear. A story of mutiny, a full-blown massacre, and the total collapse of civilization. And this quote, man, it just hits the nail on the head. The sea is absolutely merciless, no doubt about it. But what went down on those desolate little islands off of Western Australia? It proves that people, when you take away all the rules, can be so much more terrifying than any storm.
So how did it all go so spectacularly wrong? To really get it, we have to rewind. The seeds of this whole nightmare were planted way before the ship even hit the reef. It was all fueled by a toxic mix of incredible greed and a deep personal grudge.
Okay, so you've got to picture this. The Batavia wasn't just any ship. It was the brand new, top-of-the-line flagship for the VOC, the Dutch East India Company, which was basically the most powerful corporation on the planet at the time. And it wasn't just hauling people. Oh no, it was a floating treasure chest, literally. We're talking 12 chests packed with silver, priceless jewels, and even some fresh art from the master painter Peter Paul Rubens. The stakes on this trip were just astronomically high.
And at the heart of this whole thing, it really just comes down to two guys on a collision course. In one corner, you've got Commander Pelsart. He's a by-the-book company man, the picture of law and order. And in the other corner, Geronimus Cornelis. He's the super charismatic guy, but he's also a disgraced pharmacist who's running from a pretty dark past. See, he was part of this radical group that believed man was his own god, that normal rules and morality didn't apply to them. So for a guy like Cornelis, this voyage wasn't just a job. It was a golden opportunity.
And here's the kicker. This is so important. A mutiny was already being planned long before the shipwreck. Cornelis was down on the lower decks, whispering in ears, putting together his own little gang of killers from the crew. The plan was as simple as it was evil. Take the ship, kill anybody who fought back, and sail off with all that treasure to live like kings.
But then, nature had other plans. In the middle of the night, the Batavia just slams into an uncharted reef. The ship is torn to shreds. The grand mutiny plot? It's suddenly on hold. Now the only thing that matters is survival. Or, so it seemed.
You see, the shipwreck, that wasn't the disaster. That was just the prologue. This is where the story goes from a survival tale into something truly evil.
So Pelsart, the commander, he makes this huge, fateful decision. He takes the only real lifeboat, gathers a crew of his most loyal guys, and sets off on this insane 1,800-mile journey to get help. And yeah, it was an incredible feat of sailing, for sure. But it meant he left almost 270 other survivors stranded on a barren rock, totally leaderless, and, as they were about to find out, at the mercy of a monster.
The second Pelsart is out of the picture, Cornelis doesn't waste a second. He puts his mutiny plan back into action, but now it's on this tiny, terrifying scale. He creates his own little kingdom of terror on this island. First, he tricks the soldiers who are the only real threat and sends them to another island to die. Then he grabs all the weapons and the food, he forces several of the women into sexual slavery, and then he just starts killing people, systematically murdering anyone who wasn't in his gang or wasn't useful.
Just look at that number, 125. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. 125 men, women, and even children. These people survived a violent shipwreck only to be hunted down and murdered by their own shipmates, sometimes for supplies, sometimes for sport, and sometimes just because they were in the way.
But, you know, even in the middle of all this horror, this absolute darkness, a little spark of hope appeared. A small group refused to just lie down and die, and their story is just one of incredible defiance.
Remember those soldiers Cornelis tricked and sent off to die on what he thought was a waterless island? Well, their leader was this common soldier, a guy named Wiebe Hayes. In an amazing twist of fate, they did the impossible. They found fresh water. And by surviving, they became a direct threat to Cornelis' little empire of death. In this timeline, it just shows you what an insane race against time this was. While Cornelis and his thugs are on a killing spree, Wiebe Hayes and his men are scrambling to build a defense. They're using driftwood, rocks, anything they can find to build these little forts. They actually fought off several attacks from the mutineers, who had all the real weapons. They were just barely hanging on, and then, in that 9th week, they saw it, a sail on the horizon. And then, he was back. Pelsart returned. And the arrival of that rescue ship kicked off the final, violent showdown on the islands. And the justice that was handed out?
Oh, it was just as swift and brutal as the crimes themselves. Palesar didn't wait to get back home. He held trials right there, on the blood-soaked islands. Cornwallis and his main henchmen had their hands chopped off before they were hanged from makeshift gallows. As for the two youngest mutineers, they were marooned, just left on the coast of mainland Australia, becoming, kind of by default, its very first European residents.
But, believe it or not, the story doesn't end with a bunch of hangings on a remote beach. In a lot of ways, that was just the beginning. Now we gotta ask, how did this horrific event turn into, well, a national legend?
I mean, think about it. How does a story of pure human evil get remembered not as something to be buried, but something to be told over and over again? Why wasn't this just swept under the rug?
Well, a huge part of the answer lies right here, in this pamphlet. Almost 20 years later, Pelsard's journal from the voyage was published. They called it The Unlucky Voyage, and it spelled out all the gruesome details of the mutiny and the murders. It became an instant sensation.
Seriously, you can think of this thing as the 17th century's first viral true crime hit. It was packed with these really dramatic graphic engravings that made the horror feel real to people all over Europe. It didn't just tell a story, it basically invented a whole new genre of sensational, true-life disaster stories.
But, and this is a really important but, we have to take this with a grain of salt. As the historian Marilena Parlati points out, Pelsart wasn't actually there for the worst of the murders. His journal is really a second-hand account, stitched together from what desperate, starving, and furious survivors told him. Not to mention, he was also trying to protect his own reputation. So it's our main source, but it's a messy one.
And that kind of complicated legacy, it's perfectly summed up by how we see the Batavia today. You've got two versions. On the one hand, you have the relic, the actual pieces of the ship pulled from the ocean floor. They sit in a museum as these solemn reminders of a real tragedy. And on the other hand, you have the replica, a perfect full-scale reconstruction that you can tour. It's so impressive it was even used as a showpiece for the Dutch Olympic team. One is a ruin, the other is entertainment.
And this whole thing gets even weirder on the actual shores where it all happened. The area is now officially branded as the Batavia Coast. A site of a horrific mass murder has been turned into a tourist destination, with marinas and gift shops.
Which of course brings us to the big final question we have to ask ourselves. The story of the Batavia is this incredibly powerful warning about what humans are capable of. But it's also become a product. It makes you wonder, when we tell these stories, where's the line between honoring the history and just turning a real human tragedy into another thrilling myth for sale?